This video will show you the basic technical aspects when reading and writing to text files. For example, we will be using class student. So for each student you'll have a surname, a name, a student number and an age. You will need to create a text file, or sometimes referred to as a data file, in Visual Studio. It's something similar to where you create a new class. So you'll go to the top right hand corner, right click on the mouse, choose add and then new item. Remember, in classes you would choose class at the bottom. In this case you choose new item. This dialog box will then appear. You choose text file in the middle column, and at the bottom you enter the name of the file you're going to use for your data, and we technically always use the extension DAT. Once you've clicked add here, a new tab like seen at the bottom right will appear on your Visual Studio screen. Now you can enter the data in the data file. That's the data that will be read into the program. When deciding on the data, you obviously keep in mind what data you want to keep for a student. In this case it's surname, then name, then student number and then age. So on this example we've entered the data for 3 students, Krailing, Smith and Spielman. Very important to note that after the last entry, in this case the 21, you press your enter key so that the cursor is below the last entry. For you to be able to use the data file in your program, it needs to be saved in a specific folder. So top left hand corner you choose file and then save data.dat as. You'll see the folder pops up and you choose the bin folder. Inside the bin folder you choose debug, and then inside the debug folder you'll see is the exe file. That's the file that will be executed, and you need to save your data file in that same folder. So the data file goes into the bin debug folder. In this semester's work, we typically put the read data and the write data methods inside the list class. So the first thing to note is that at the top of the class you need to say using system.io. That would allow you to read from a file and to write to a file. Inside the read data method, you need to create an object that links you to the actual data file. This object, in this case we call it SR, is an instance of the class stream reader. Notice the way we declare the object SR, and notice the text parameter data.dat specifies that SR is now linked to the file data.dat. You want to read through the file until you reach the end of the file, and the way to do that is you say while not sr.end of stream. That end of stream is something similar to end of file. So it simply says while you've not reached the end of the file, keep on reading data from the file. Reading from the text file is very similar to reading from the keyboard. The only main difference here is, remember up to now you've been saying console.readline. We replace the word console with SR, which simply says read from that data file and not from the console or the keyboard. So you'll see for all 4 read entries it's now SR.readline. The second very important thing to notice here is that you need to have the same order in which you entered the data in the text file. So in the text file you have surname, name, student number and then age. So your readline statements must be in that same order. Once you've read in the surname, the name, the student number, the age, you do the basic, which we've been doing in add methods in the past. You create a new object called new one, and then you add it to the list. So this is very similar to the add method. You create a new object and add it to the list. It is very important with the read data that you close the file at the end. So sr.close at the end is very important. The write data is used to write the data back from the array back to the text file. So remember, in the read data we had a stream reader. Now we declare object SW, which is an instance of class stream writer. And once again we have the parameter data.dat that links SW to the data file. When reading from the file, we say while not end of stream, but now we want to write the contents of the list to the data file. So we have a simple for loop that reverses the list. So we say for int x starting at the first element up to the last element. So that's your for loop that will write the data from the list to the data file. Once again, we replace the word console with SW. So instead of writing to the screen, we're now writing to SW, which is linked to the text file data.dat. And again, the order in which we write it must be the same as what we read it, so that it's always in the same order. So we're writing in the order surname, name, student number, and age. Similar to the read data method, you have to close the file at the end with sw.close. At the start of the video, we mentioned that the read data and the write data methods are implemented inside the list class, and they're normally implemented as private methods, so they're not called from the outside. Notice where we call them. The read data obviously needs to be done at the start of the session, when the program starts. So we put that in the constructor of student list. So right at the start, when student list is created, or the object which is an instance of student list is created, we call read data. We introduce a new method called close, which typically will be used at the end of the session, and that writes the data back to the text file. Okay, so in the application class, notice what happens. In your main method, you declare object list, which is an instance of student list. It calls the constructor of student list, so right at the start of the main method, the read data file is thus called, and the data is read into an array list. At the end of the main method, just before you have your typical console.read line, your last statement is then list.close. So when you've reached the end of the program, you call list.close, which writes the data back to the text file.